Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Hannah Earnshaw. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a ministry leader for the LGBTQ plus ministry at All Saints Church, Pasadena. Part of our mission as a ministry is education, both for our community and any allies who want to join us along the way. And part of that education is this, The Talk, a guest speaker series featuring voices from the LGBTQ plus community across the Episcopal Church and beyond. There is so much wisdom and experience within our community, and it's time for us to listen to what it has to say to us. So without further ado, Thomas, will you introduce our guest speaker for today?
Absolutely. And I'm Thomas Diaz. I have a use he, him pronouns, and I'm the staff liaison for the LGBTQ ministry here at All Saints. We are so happy and thrilled to have Brian Silva, who's the founder and executive director of NEAT, the National Equality Action Team. He's been the leader in LGBTQ plus advocacy community for more than a decade, and has a track record of being on executive leaderships and organizational development and coalition building and empowering volunteers for LGBTQ advocacy. Brian has served as the executive director, first for Marriage Equality New York, and then later Marriage Equality USA, which is one of the nation's oldest and largest volunteer grassroots for LGBTQ plus groups. And under his leadership, multiple states and the US Supreme Court passed marriage equality across the nation, which is obviously a huge victory for us as a community. Through NEAT, hundreds of partners and volunteers work together every day through a collaborative action and partnership so that the continued fight for LGBTQ justice and equality is met everywhere. And so we are so glad that you're with us, Brian, and please tell us a little bit more about NEAT.
Great. Well, thanks again so much for having me. Again, my name is Brian, use he, him pronouns. So happy to be here with such a great partner. So NEAT is the home for collaborative action for LGBTQ justice. Our goal is to build shared actions that any organization can easily and turnkey plug into to get involved in common fights for our community, whether that be through public education, town halls, where over 129 organizations are co-sponsoring to bring folks together, or phone banking collectively for the Equality Act, where any organization can host a phone bank night, and once they get folks to the Zoom, we take it from there. So we just try to make activism as easy and as fun as possible, so that collectively we're having even more impact.
That's awesome. And so, what are the current, obviously the Equality Act is probably one of the biggest, fights going on, but, what is up really with the Equality Act now? What is the struggle now that we have with the Senate?
Yeah, so as we know, under current Senate rules, you need to have 60 votes to pass any legislation, and so right now we are actively working to achieve that goal so that we can pass the Equality Act. One of the ways that the easiest way folks can get involved is through phone banking from home. We have a program called Anytime Calling. So you can sign up for a day, and then on that day, generally you can call anytime between 10 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. in your local time zone. So yes, that means even 8:30 p.m. in Alaska. So it's really, really flexible. We have folks that call every day during their lunch break for 20, 30 minutes. We have folks who call for 2 hours on the weekends and everything in between. So, the Equality Act is, it's such a simple idea, to update current law so that LGBTQ people are afforded the same civil rights and protections, as anybody else. And one of the things about the Equality Act that some folks, don't know is that it actually updates current civil rights law to close some of the gaps that were there when original, civil rights laws were passed. So there's actually additional protections for women and religious minorities and people of color. So that's really exciting. It is the LGBTQ non-discrimination bill, but like so many of us who live so many different multiple and intersectional identities, the benefit of this legislation extends far beyond that, which is why so many organizations that are not maybe traditionally LGBTQ or have that as their core focus have signed on in support.
Right, absolutely. And seeing that, I know like in what I learned, with such work like this, you really, I'm sure you depend on like the grassroots of making sure you're equipping people, for that. What are the challenges, to ensuring that folks are equipped to get the work done and advocating and, reaching out to senators, to lobbyists and folks who really are really needing our voice at the moment?
I think one of the hardest things is just giving folks the tools to be able to do it and do it effectively. And I think that's where NEAT comes in. Phone calls and leaving messages with your senator with personal messages is a powerful way to let folks know about your experience. And but if you were to ask somebody, well, how do I do that? A lot of times folks just don't know. So, by giving folks a place where they can go, for this particular campaign, it's equalitytime.org. You can go there. There's all different actions folks can take. It gives folks a very easy turnkey way to participate in democracy, to make sure that their voices are being heard.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about, your work with Supreme Court cases? In I think it was in 2019, we had quite a few cases, and that with they're kind of piling up in the courts. And then, in 2020, some good, news came out of that. But what's your experience with the Supreme Court, and how does NEAT advocate for those cases?
Yeah, so we two programs that we've kind of built up, though when we execute, are obviously in partnership with many different organizations. So one is Our Day in Court, #OurDayInCourt, and that is our program around Supreme Court cases affecting LGBTQ people on the day that the arguments are actually heard, in the court. So in the past, that would usually involve helping to build a large coalition and help to lead that. Different groups would take on different parts of it. There would usually be a large rally with speakers in front of the Supreme Court on that day. And then that evening, we'd have a virtual town hall where folks could come and hear from legal experts, what happened in the court, what was the tone, what were the questions being asked, what were some of the insights that people saw, and give people a place to come to ask questions and hear from community leaders and get reassurance. So that was that part of it. And then Decision Day is actually an event started by our preceding organization, which was Marriage Equality USA. And this usually involved coordinating and supporting grassroots local and state organizations to organize local events in their communities on the day that the court would hand down their decision, because obviously that's the moment where we really know what's going to happen. So we've had that where we've had 50, 60, 70 events going on across the country, and again we are not there physically putting them on, but we're providing connection to messaging, providing resources for advertising, a central web hub, decisionday.org, where folks can go to find the local events in their area, micro grants to organizations that might need that to be able to execute it, and to make sure that when the decision comes down, the voices of the people that are most affected are elevated and heard. And then again, having a virtual town hall that evening to talk through the decision, because every time one of these decisions, comes down, it's not just an opinion. It's not just a piece of paper with words written on it. These are people's lives. The decision in Fulton versus Philadelphia could determine whether a child stays in, out of a loving forever home simply because the family who's opening their arms to provide that, are two lesbians or two gay people or, two transgender people, and that our government money would be going to support that. We're not even, the argument isn't even private funds. This is taxpayer, everybody's money that's supposed to go to serve, everybody. So, we always want to honor and remember the fact that each one of these opinions affects people on a very personal level. And it's our job to create community space and support the creation of community space, during those times.
Absolutely. Absolutely with that. And I can say, personally that I was out there in 2019 in November in from Supreme Court, and just it was my first experience, being out there doing a hearing day, oral hearing. And it's just it was, for me, it was so impressive to see all of the coalitions coming together on the street, on the steps of the Supreme Court. And it was really the first time I ever saw, here at All Saints, we have a value called radical inclusion. It's part of our core values of our church. And it really, for me, it was so interesting to see, like, it just was not about, the umbrella of LGBTQ. It really was just like radical inclusion of everybody coming to the steps of the Supreme Court and saying, hold up, like, there's, this equality is important to us, not just because it needs to be on paper, because these are actual lives. Like, these are lives that we are talking about. And I think that was the sentiment that, I was getting at, it just being there for all those hours, in the middle of the night, preparing for this event to happen, and seeing that. And so saying that, how does NEAT contribute to like the state level? Does NEAT have any works in how different, right now we're currently seeing different states wanting to do some really interesting and weird things, especially for the transgender community right now. How does NEAT contribute to state local levels of law?
Yeah, so one of our core values is that we won't go into a community or a state level, fight or something like that unless we're invited, unless we have a local partner who can provide guidance and direction for us of what to do, on the ground there. That's been a core value of ours for a long time, because local organizers, usually know best. And so, so that's one thing. And so while we have partners in every single state, there's lots of times where what our main tool is, which is phone banking, isn't the best tool. So we stay in touch with those states and make sure that we're at the ready to provide that if needed. And then, for our partners that do need that, then we're able to do that. So in Georgia last year, we were able to provide their coalition, with nonpartisan voter registration and get out the vote phone banks for the special election. And in Montana and Alabama this year, states both with just, really terrible anti-transgender laws being proposed and moving through the state legislature. We've been able to both organize folks within those states, but then also organize people all around the country to make calls into those states and get local residents connected to their legislators, to leave messages. So yeah, there's lots of different campaigns that we're involved in, whether it's at the state or national level. And the idea is that instead of each of these folks, recreating the wheel and building a whole field infrastructure and system for that particular collaborative program, they can call us and we can, kind of deploy it there and they can just build on top of it.
Mhm. Right. With that. And in, going along with, I think, with states, just, really creating just very terrible anti-trans legislation, and, and that it seems like that continues to increase in ways. What was it like, during the, what was it like during the Trump administration, with, with the really just, on the federal level, especially when we think about the anti-trans in the military? What are some ways that that kind of changed the way, I guess, the tone of how advocacy, worked during that era in time, just because there was just so much happening all at once, like the different campaigns. What did you see really during that time, and how much of that has had an effect to now in this current new administration?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things the most important thing is to remind folks, elections matter. 4 years ago, the election of the former president mattered, unfortunately, in all the ways that, were quite terrible, for the most marginalized and vulnerable among us. And so those first 2 years were especially hard, I think for the community. And then 2 years later, elections mattered again. And this time they mattered with, a landslide victory of progressive and pro-LGBTQ people being elected into the House, which from a legislative standpoint was able to kind of put a stop to most of the legislative work. Now, of course, there's lots of work that can be done outside of Congress through different government agencies and writing up rules and regulations. And so, this past November, elections again mattered. And the direction of government, shifted overwhelmingly, from just 4 years prior. And so, I think for us, a lot of the advocacy was fighting, the terrible regulations and some of the, really awful proposed laws. Some of the things like the trans military ban, lots of things were taken to court and put on hold, and now we're seeing them, being able to move back to, where they should be. But I think another thing that we also have to remember is that, the former president and his, kind of entourage and many of the people associated with him politically, they live in a world of disinformation. They live in a world where people in that world have, a number of them are convinced that, he was an amazingly pro-LGBTQ president. And so I think one of the things we also were fighting during then and continue to fight now and make sure of is to bring truth to history, to talk about exactly what happened during those years, and not just to people whose identities are queer, but queer and undocumented, queer and Black, queer and transgender women of color, queer and female, and needing to be able to control their bodies. So making sure we talk about all of the terrible things that were done during then, and make sure people know that and remember that, so that hopefully we can prevent it from happening again. And we're in the middle of that fight right now, right? This idea of creating your own reality and then creating the echo chamber and bringing people in and kind of preventing them from leaving, so they just kind of listen and believe. The former president's going to be reinaugurated today on March 4th, and the election was stolen. I always find it funny. The election's only stolen when you lose. Isn't that interesting? By 7 million votes. But these types of things have real world consequences. And so I think that's also part of our charge, is to make sure to tell the history of what that president did, to us and to all types of marginalized people, and his attempt to destroy America and to destroy what democracy is.
So I'm interested in, obviously Meet is like a big undertaking now with phone banking and everything else. How did it start? What was the history of the organization?
So, gosh, 1993, a small group of activists decided that everyone, regardless of sexuality or gender, should be able to marry. That was the beginnings of it. And from there sprung Marriage Equality New York, and from there Marriage Equality USA and chapters across the country. And the two would work for this for this idea, eventually merging together, and during that fight, developed many different programs to educate the public on why marriage mattered, and to fight for that. And as more states passed marriage equality laws, you had more and more activists, grassroots volunteers and activists living in states where there wasn't much they could do, because the state had passed marriage equality and they had federal officials supporting marriage equality. So Marriage Equality USA started doing a lot of these kind of virtual phone banks where folks could come. I mean, at that point we were coming together in our homes and our churches and synagogues and community centers and making calls in person. But we were calling other states and talking to people about it, calling other states and transferring them to leave messages with their legislators. And as more and more states had ballot measures, and this type of work expanded. And so when marriage was finally won nationwide, while our mission was civil marriage equality for all, our vision was a world of full LGBTQ equality and justice. So we did decide to close the organization down. We thought that it is important for a nonprofit that achieves its mission to do that. But we also said that it was important that everything we built continue to be put into the community towards full equality. And so the programs and donor base and volunteer base and all of these things, a good chunk of it, those that wanted to continue, were kind of folded up and spun off to become the National Equality Action Team, and to grow from still using similar tactics in both public education and advocacy, but to grow from not just marriage, and then not just traditional LGBT issues, but this real intersectional approach to the issues that affect and disproportionately affect LGBTQ people.
And you mentioned about gathering in churches and synagogues and stuff. So how is it being sort of working and partnering with organizations, and particularly religious organizations, when often it's a perception that religious organizations are the ones that are sort of opposed to all this stuff? Talk a bit about what that's been like.
So I grew up Catholic, and everything I knew about being Catholic was, on Sunday, they would ask for an additional donation for the St. Vincent de Paul Society for folks, who didn't have as much. There was an annual trip to go build houses in Tijuana, Mexico. There was coat drives. At Christmas, we'd choose a family and buy presents for them, and then that would get distributed. Everything was about giving and treating people the way you wanted to be treated, and that was the action of faith. and then there was like the religion. And I always think that that there's kind of there's a difference for a lot of folks. So when I kind of came to accept myself as a gay man and came out, I very much pushed all of that away because I agreed with you. I thought, religion hates LGBTQ people. And what I've learned and grown into, as so many lay people and people of faith and faith leaders have, is that has never been the case. At least in the faith tradition I come from, in a Christian tradition, Jesus said, love your neighbor. He didn't say, ask who your neighbor's married to, and so I think one of the most beautiful things that I saw come out of the marriage movement, because, one of the biggest things about the anti-marriage equality was, religious institutions were going to have to perform marriages, which was crazy because they'd never had to do that before. But you started seeing people of faith, leaders of faith step up and speak out in favor of LGBTQ equality and treating your neighbor with the golden rule and the way you wanted to be treated. And then you saw people of faith, obviously they had been forever, but really publicly, starting to see the organizing of remembering that faith and religion is a living, breathing thing. It changes with time. It changes, with the people who are in it. And so, I've never fought for a religious denomination to marry people of the same sex. That's for them to decide. But we have seen, different denominations, move to allow same-sex marriage, to allow women in leadership, to allow LGBTQ clergy members, and having those discussions themselves and really coming out and reclaiming the fact and saying that, a person of faith's call to life is to help those less fortunate, to treat people the way they want to be treated. So to fight for LGBTQ equality is probably the most faithful thing a person could do. And I think, it is just, in my opinion, the way I've always looked at it, it's such a return to the core of what so many faith traditions are. And I think, what you're seeing across the country is, you can no longer say that, religious organizations are against LGBTQ people. That is not the case. 70% plus of people support same-sex marriage. And, what is it, 70 or 80% of people in the country identify as a person of faith. So, there's a disconnect there. And I think that leadership from the faith community in fighting for these equal rights and so many other issues that are important to us, humane immigration reform and refugee and asylum and all of these things, I think that mantle of progressive faith, of people of faith standing up and reclaiming that back from this monolith idea that all religions are anti-LGBT is beautiful. It's wonderful. It's critical. It's necessary. And we've all been on a journey to get there, including myself. And it's a journey well worth taking.
And I think part of that too is also recognizing, that there's also the continued struggle in that, that we actually our very own Susan Russell, Reverend Sister Russell says, you almost have to celebrate each milestone just one inch at a time. And to really recognize that there has been great milestones met with faith traditions and LGBTQ justice and equality, right? Especially in the span of like 20 years, there have been great milestones. And yet, I think we're realizing in this current time, especially from this, transition of like going from one administration to the next and realizing that there had so much damage was made in one end, but that not necessarily the other end is necessarily going to fix it. Like the voices that have been carried on through all of these decades have to continue, and they need to be ready to mantle up to do it. And realizing that there's so much more work still to be done. And including, as we're kind of the subject on religious institutions, and including it all within our denominations of And specifically for us here, in the Episcopal Church, we've had some really great, wonderful milestones with women clergy, LGBT clergy, and bishops, marriage equality being recognized, but yet there is still tension in our church about marriage and about the full inclusivity of what it means to identify within the LGBTQ community. And maybe sometimes one letter and acronym gets more pass and acceptance than the others, and we're starting to see that. And I think that moments like this and the works that we see through, I think, organizations like yours, I think really equip people who want to be able to hang on to both work of saying, like, I'm going to be out there on the secular level, to get these laws and legislations out, but at the same time, I want to take this back into my faith tradition and really, move the clergy leaders and folks within any really religious institution to say, like, we need equality here too. And so, it kind of goes and connects together. So I think that's a really you did a wonderful, it was really beautiful, well said, and how we both are being experienced. And, and we're grateful here at All Saints that we've been able to participate in that, especially when it came to marriage equality. We've had a long history in how marriage equality has acted throughout our church here at All Saints. So with that, so in speaking about, really the future, we're only a few months into this new administration, but, what do you foresee? What do you see happening, I guess, in the next 2 years before like midterms and the election?
Well, I see happening whatever the folks listening to and watching this recording are willing to fight for. That's what we're going to get. We're going to get what we fight for. We're also going to get what we don't fight for, and so I think there's an exhaustion after 4 years of the last president, and it is important to recharge our batteries. I think that with the current administration, it is important to give them some time to make change. But it's also our responsibility to hold them accountable to the things that they said they were going to do. I hope that we will have the first national LGBTQ non-discrimination protections passed. That is my hope. I hope to see the first transgender person confirmed to a Senate confirmation position. I've already seen the first LGBTQ person confirmed by the Senate to a cabinet level position. So I think that, I just think that we have to remember that being an advocate, whether that's for LGBTQ equality or women's rights or climate or, whatever it is that you're passionate about, they're all important and nobody can do everything. So, find your lanes and go for it. But we just have to remember that this country changes because the people push it that way. The people advocate. They phone bank, they text bank, they write letters, they march on Washington. They go to town halls, they run for office, and they don't start with the US Senate. They start with the local water board and the local school board or the church council. All of these things are critical and important. And so I think it's just, I think that will be the question mark is of what we will see. And I hope that, we just continue to move forward and to push forward. And I think that if we do that, there's already been a tremendous amount of change in less than 100 days. And all of that is happening, and all of what led up to that is happening in the midst of the worst global pandemic that any of us have ever seen, in our lifetime. And unfortunately, up until recently, we were not only fighting the pandemic, we were fighting facts and science. So that's nice to be a little bit different. But we just, we have to continue to push for and advocate for the things that we believe in, no matter who is in, the state capitol, the city council chambers, the White House, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up something interesting, which I guess we can wrap up on, is the need for rest, is the need for self-care, in the form of, like, I guess, having this form of self-compassion for yourself in this work that we do. And, how would you say, what's in, how can we create rest while we know that there's so much work still needs to do, and that we, I think that an example of that, would be, last summer we saw the uprising, we saw the streets being filled, and it was a sight to behold, and it lasted for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then, historically, sometimes these things do die off, and the streets became empty again. But then what happened was that it equipped people saying, hey, even though maybe we're not, demonstrating on the streets, but now I think people have taken it on, on an individual level. We're trying to figure out which grassroots can I belong to, what can I do at my local level, and all of that. But then I think we started to hear, a lot of folks as the year was ending, on top of, like you said, a global health pandemic, was burnout, and how that can happen. So I guess from your experience working in grassroots and advocacy, the importance of making sure that you're taking care of yourself. Like, what are some tips that you have for that?
Well, I spent a small amount of time as an EMT, and the first thing that they teach you as an EMT when you arrive somewhere is scene safety. And the reason is because if you don't take care of yourself, then you're much more likely to become injured. And now I have to take care of two people. Mm-hmm. And the same thing goes with advocacy. We need you in the fight for the long run. This country is, I'm going to screw myself up, a couple hundred years old, and it is nowhere near perfect. It's a hell of a lot better it was when it first started, but it's nowhere near perfect. Right. And that's after hundreds of years of work.
Yeah.
The beauty of our country is not that we're perfect and we've got it right. It's that we have designed it in such a way that we can keep fighting to make change that's way too long overdue. And truthfully, with systems that are not, are not able to be used equally by everybody here. But all of that being said, is that whether it's this fight for the Equality Act today or the next fight for something tomorrow, the fight is going to continue, and we're going to need strong advocates. And an advocate is only as strong as how good they take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. So for me, especially in this pandemic, when there's so much work from home and everything, I run. I try to go outside and I run once a day. I say 60 minutes in my head, it's somewhere closer to 30, but I get outside and I unplug and I do something, for myself. And everybody's got that activity or needs to find that activity. It's reading a book, it's binge watching a show, it's whatever it is for you. But if you burn out and we lose you for the long term or permanently, then that's just a huge loss. And then we're one less fighter down, one fighter down in our army of people that we need. So, I think that it's absolutely critical. It's better to get 3 things done well and completely than to attempt 6 things and accomplish none of them, and I think sometimes, we want the full solution, And that's admirable, and we should always fight for it. You know, I think about civil unions. I mean, nobody ever talks about civil unions anymore. We never fought for civil unions, but there was, you know, there was certain fights where that became the intermediate step, and that's what passed, you know. And so in the meantime, people had some protections, and the very next day we were back out there and we were saying, you know, we're going to fight, you know, keep fighting for marriage equality. Like, you know, yes, we got this first part, but second class is, you know, isn't good enough. So I just encourage people to, you know, don't take on so much that it, you know, that it burns you out. You know, it's a big world, there's lots of people there, and there's lots of folks to fight for lots of different things. So share the load, share the burden.
I say I've done my resting. I've been on my run. I've been binge watched my favorite show. I'm feeling energized and want to get involved. How do I get involved in what NEAT is doing? How do I sign up? How do I volunteer?
Yeah, great. So I encourage everybody to check out our website, theneat.org, sign up for our, you know, our newsletter and to stay in touch. And part of the sign up asks if you're interested in volunteering. So you can just say, yep, send me some more information. Also on our page is a link to any of our actions going on. We'll be doing organizing and virtual town hall around the upcoming Fulton decision. You can sign up to attend that. We've got a link to equalitytime.org from there, or you can just go straight there and sign up to make phone calls to pass the Equality Act. We need those calls going in every single day. So, and again, it's so flexible. You can dial anytime, usually from 10 a.m. till 8:30 p.m. in your local time zone. You know, yeah, hop on over and help us out. And I'll also say, you know, if you don't like making phone calls, that's no problem. If you don't have time to volunteer, that's no problem. The other way is that you can always make a donation. And I will say this, you know, I say this almost every speech that I give. We would love your donation. We would love your volunteer hours. But for us, the more important thing is that you are giving to someone that's doing work that you believe in, and whether that's money or time. So, you know, it doesn't have to be NEAT. It can be, you know, All Saints. It can be your local LGBT center. It can be your state LGBT group. It can be, you know, whoever. But you know, just give of time or money to those organizations to help move that work forward that we all so strongly believe in.
Yes, thank you so much, Brian, for that. And I want to mention that All Saints is once again going to co-sponsor with you with the Equality Act, and we're very pleased to do that and happy to, you know, be able to put our name in that list, and you know, hoping that we can get our own parishioners here motivated to make calls and to be part of that continued work. So, and we again thank you so much for allowing us to be in partnership with you with all the many important legislation works that you've done and campaigns. You know, All Saints is thrilled to be part of it. So thank you for that. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And again, we've been with Brian Silva here at NEAT, the Executive Director of NEAT, the National Equality Action Team. And we hope to have you again, you know, in the near future, especially with depending on how things turn out. Maybe towards the end of the year, we can maybe do an update of how things are going, especially with the Equality Act. It'd be great to have you back again.
Great, I'd love to. Thank you so much, and thanks for all of your support.